The Empire threw her away like broken machinery, then wondered why the stars turned against them. The cargo freighter descended through the frozen clouds of Outpost K-9 with a low metallic groan that rattled every loose bolt in Ethan Walker's repair bay. Outside, the storm howled across the ice fields at nearly 80 miles an hour, carrying sharp crystals of snow that hissed against the station walls like static across old radio channels. Ethan wiped grease from his hands with a stained gray rag and glanced toward the landing pad through the frosted window. Nobody came to K-9 unless they were desperate, dangerous, or dying. Usually all three. The freighter's engines coughed black vapor into the white air before shutting down with a tired whine. For a moment, silence swallowed everything except the distant scream of the wind. Then the cargo ramp lowered. Four armored Dominion soldiers marched down first, their silver helmets glowing faint blue beneath the station floodlights. They carried pulse rifles, but moved like men already bored with their assignment. Behind them hovered a sealed cryo container nearly 8 feet long, its surface covered in layers of frost. Ethan frowned. "You guys lost." One soldier stepped forward and handed him a digital transfer slate. "Payment for your contract work on the mining relays," he said flatly. Ethan scanned the file. His expression hardened. "This says biological asset transfer." "Correct. I asked for credits. The Dominion has decided this is more valuable." Ethan looked back toward the frozen container. Something inside shifted. Very slowly. A chill crawled up his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What exactly did you dump on my landing pad?" The soldier almost smirked. "A problem nobody wants anymore." With a sharp mechanical hiss, the cryolock disengaged. Cold vapor spilled across the steel floor. Ethan stepped closer despite himself. Inside the chamber lay a woman. Alien. Tall even while curled slightly against the freezing restraints. Her skin shimmered a pale turquoise beneath the white emergency lights, almost glowing through the frost covering her arms. Long silver hair spilled across her shoulders like threads of frozen silk. Heavy restraint cuffs circled both wrists, and a black metallic collar wrapped around her throat, pulsing with faint red symbols. She opened her eyes. Gold. Bright gold. Not weak. Not broken. Furious. Ethan had seen fear before. Exhaustion, too. This was neither. The woman stared at him with the kind of hatred usually reserved for executioners. Her voice came low and rough from the cold. "Did my father finally order my death?" The storm outside seemed to disappear for one long second. Ethan blinked. "Your father?" One of the soldiers laughed quietly. "She still thinks she matters." Another stepped closer to Ethan and lowered his voice. "Listen carefully, human. You didn't see us. You didn't hear her name. And when she disappears, you ask no questions." Ethan's eyes drifted toward the strange symbols burning across the black collar. He recognized them immediately. Royal Dominion insignia. His stomach tightened. "Hold on," he muttered. "That's impossible." The alien woman slowly sat upright inside the chamber despite the restraints pulling against her wrists. There was dignity in the movement. Royal dignity. Even now. Even discarded like cargo. "Princess Veilira," Ethan whispered before he could stop himself. The nearest soldier's expression darkened instantly. "Not anymore." Then the soldier turned and signaled his men back toward the ship. Just like that. No ceremony. No explanation. They left her there like unwanted equipment abandoned in a snowstorm. The freighter engines roared back to life, flooding the landing pad with blue light before disappearing into the frozen clouds overhead. Silence returned. Ethan stared at the woman inside the chamber. She stared right back. Her jaw tightened when she noticed him studying the collar. "Go ahead," she said coldly. "Decide what price I'm worth." Ethan looked at the restraints cutting into her pale wrists, then at the frost forming across her bare shoulders from the failing cryo unit. Without saying a word, he reached over and shut the freezing system off completely. Warm air slowly filled the chamber. Veilira's expression shifted for the first time. Confusion. Ethan removed his heavy thermal jacket and tossed it toward her. "You're freezing," he said simply. The alien princess caught the coat against her chest, but said nothing. Outside, somewhere deep beyond the storm, thunder rolled across the ice fields like distant war drums. The heating vents inside Outpost K-9 rattled weakly as warm air pushed through rusted ducts that should have failed years ago. Ethan Walker sealed the main hangar doors one by one, while snow hammered the metal walls hard enough to shake loose dust from the ceiling beams. The storm was getting worse. His weather monitor flashed red across every screen in the station. External visibility, less than 20 feet. Wind speed, 92 miles per hour. He glanced back toward the cryo container sitting beneath the dim overhead lights. Princess Veolara remained exactly where he had left her, wrapped in his oversized thermal jacket like she did not know what to do with kindness. The black restraint collar around her throat continued pulsing faint crimson every few seconds. Tracking technology. Expensive tracking technology. Ethan walked to a storage cabinet and grabbed a portable plasma heater before setting it near the chamber entrance. "You should get out of there," he said. "The chamber insulation is failing." Veolara watched him carefully. "You speak to me as though I am a person." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You are a person." She looked away immediately, almost disturbed by the answer. Outside, thunder rolled again through the frozen mountains surrounding the outpost. Ethan moved toward the control panel mounted beside the cryo unit and studied the lock sequence attached to her restraints. Dominion military encryption. Top level. He exhaled slowly. "This is going to hurt the station budget." Veolara's golden eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Trying to remove those cuffs before your hands freeze solid." "Why?" Ethan glanced up at her. "Because I am not leaving somebody chained in my garage." For a second, she looked genuinely speechless. Then her expression hardened again, rebuilding the cold mask she wore like armor. "Humans are opportunists," she said quietly. "The Dominion taught us that much." Ethan typed another override code into the panel. "Yeah?" The Dominion also dumped their princess in a shipping crate. Sparks hissed from the locking mechanism. One cuff released with a sharp metallic click. Veolara flinched slightly at the sudden freedom in her wrist, like she had forgotten how it felt. Ethan noticed faint marks beneath the restraint band, but said nothing. The second cuff unlocked moments later. She slowly lowered both hands into her lap and stared at them in silence. "There," Ethan muttered. "Congratulations. You are officially the least threatening person in this station." Veolara almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she carefully stepped out of the cryo container onto the hangar floor. Even exhausted and weakened from the cold, she stood nearly a foot taller than Ethan. The station lights reflected softly across her turquoise skin, while silver strands of hair fell over one shoulder. Royalty clung to her posture whether she wanted it or not. Ethan handed her a steaming metal cup from the nearby food synthesizer. "Coffee substitute," he said. "Tastes terrible, but it keeps people alive around here." Veolara accepted the cup cautiously. "You believe I need saving?" "No," Ethan replied. "I think you need sleep." The alien princess stared down into the rising steam for several long seconds. "In the Dominion," she said quietly, "nobody gives comfort without expecting ownership in return." Ethan leaned against a tool cabinet and folded his arms. "Sounds exhausting." Another faint flicker crossed her face. Not amusement exactly. More like confusion struggling to become trust. Then suddenly every overhead light inside the station dimmed. Warning alarms echoed through the corridor. Ethan straightened immediately. Great. He moved toward the nearest monitor. Power grid instability warnings flooded the screen. Ice buildup on the external fusion relays. If the relays failed completely, the station would lose heat before morning. Veolara stepped closer behind him. "Your reactor is old," she observed softly. "So am I." She studied the schematics flashing across the monitor with sharp golden eyes. "No," she said after a moment. "The relay calibration is wrong. Whoever repaired this system used mining-grade frequency balancing instead of military thermal distribution." Ethan looked at her. "You can read reactor code?" Veolara slowly lifted her gaze toward him. "Ethan Walker," she said quietly, "before my father erased me from the Empire, I commanded fleets." Silence settled between them while the storm screamed outside like something alive wandering the frozen dark. The station lights flickered every few seconds now, throwing long shadows across the narrow corridors of Outpost K. 9 as freezing wind rattled the outer walls hard enough to sound like distant footsteps moving through the storm. Ethan crouched beside an open maintenance panel with a plasma wrench in one hand while sparks snapped against the frozen metal floor. The relay system was worse than he thought. Ice crystals had formed inside the thermal regulators, choking power flow through half the station. One more drop in temperature, and the pipes would freeze solid. Veolyra stood silently near the reactor console, watching lines of glowing code scroll across the old display screens. The soft blue light reflected across her turquoise skin, making her look almost unreal against the rusted machinery surrounding her. Royalty trapped inside a dying mining station. Ethan tightened another connector and glanced over his shoulder. You really commanded fleets? Veolyra did not answer immediately. Her fingers moved across the console with calm precision. 3 battle groups. 72 ships. Ethan gave a low whistle. That is a lot of responsibility. It was, she replied quietly. Until my father decided obedience mattered more than competence. The reactor suddenly groaned beneath the floor. Warning lights flashed red. Ethan muttered something under his breath and grabbed the edge of the panel before another surge rattled the room. Veolyra turned toward him sharply. The thermal output is collapsing because your backup regulators are fighting each other. Ethan frowned. What? She stepped closer to the exposed control system and pointed toward 2 cracked balancing units mounted near the coolant line. Those components were designed for cargo freighters, not fixed stations. They are distributing heat unevenly. Ethan stared at her for a second. You figured that out in 30 seconds? I had excellent engineers. There was no arrogance in the statement. Just memory. Ethan shifted aside so she could reach the controls. Veolyra knelt beside the reactor housing carefully, silver hair falling across one shoulder as she studied the damaged circuitry. For the first time since arriving at the station, she looked focused instead of guarded, alive instead of discarded. Ethan noticed faint scars disappearing beneath the collar around her throat before she adjusted her posture and hid them again. Your hands are shaking, he said quietly. Veolyra froze for half a second. The cryochamber weakened my circulation. Ethan stood and grabbed another thermal blanket from a nearby locker before draping it gently across her shoulders. She looked up at him immediately, startled by the gesture more than the touch itself. You keep doing that, she murmured. Doing what? Treating me gently. Ethan leaned back against the wall beside the reactor. Where I come from, that is considered normal. Veolyra looked down at the blanket wrapped around her hands. Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. In the Dominion, kindness is usually a performance. Power pretending to be mercy. The room fell quiet except for the steady hum of failing machinery. Ethan studied her face for a moment. Beneath the cold control and royal posture, exhaustion lingered in her eyes like somebody who had spent years waiting for betrayal. Well, he said finally, I am not very good at pretending. Something shifted in Veolyra's expression then. Small, fragile, like ice cracking beneath sunlight. Suddenly, the main communications terminal burst to life behind them with a blast of static. Both of them turned instantly. The monitor flickered through several distorted channels before stabilizing into the image of a Dominion emergency broadcast. A silver imperial crest rotated slowly against a black background. Then a voice filled the station. Calm, cold. Official. Priority alert to all outer colonies. By direct order of Emperor Kaler, the traitor, known as Veolyra Solari is to be detained immediately. Harboring the fugitive princess will be considered an act of treason against the Dominion. Ethan slowly looked toward Veolyra. She stood completely still beside the reactor console, golden eyes fixed on the screen without blinking. The broadcast continued. The fugitive is considered highly manipulative and emotionally dangerous. Ethan glanced back at the transmission, then at the exhausted woman wrapped in his old blanket beside a broken heater in the middle of nowhere. He almost laughed. Veolyra spoke without looking at him. Now you understand why they abandoned me. But Ethan noticed something she did not. The imperial seal on the broadcast had changed. Not black and silver anymore. Black and red. Wartime colors. The storm did not stop for 3 straight days. Snow buried half the lower docking bay and thick ice spread across the outer station windows in pale spiderweb patterns that glowed beneath the emergency lights. Outpost K-9 felt smaller every hour. Smaller and quieter. Ethan stood near the kitchen synthesizer, stirring powdered coffee into hot water while the old ventilation fans rattled overhead with uneven rhythm. Somewhere deeper inside the station, metal pipes groaned from the cold. He glanced toward the opposite side of the room. Veolyra sat near the reactor console wrapped in layered thermal blankets, her attention fixed on a floating holographic display she had rebuilt from spare mining equipment. Lines of Dominion star charts rotated slowly in the dim light. Ethan still could not fully process the image in front of him. A discarded princess repairing his station while hiding from an empire. "You have not slept," Veilira said without looking up from the holograms. Ethan shrugged. "The station complains louder when I do. Your left eye twitches when you are exhausted." He blinked once. "That is unsettling information." A faint sound escaped her then. Not quite laughter. Softer than that. The closest thing to peace Ethan had heard from her since she arrived. He handed her a steaming metal cup and sat across from her near the heater vent. Outside, the storm continued scraping against the station walls like frozen sandpaper. Veilira accepted the drink carefully. "This terrible beverage is growing less terrible." That is the nicest thing anybody has ever said about station coffee. Her golden eyes flickered toward him briefly before returning to the holograms. "You joke often." Occupational hazard. Silence settled between them again. Not awkward this time. Just tired. Warm. Human. Ethan noticed she no longer sat like a prisoner waiting for punishment. Her shoulders were lower now. Less rigid. The black collar around her throat still pulsed faintly every few seconds. But the fear behind her eyes had softened into caution instead of panic. Veilira suddenly expanded one section of the holographic star map. Several red markers appeared along the outer systems near Dominion territory. Ethan frowned. "What am I looking at?" "Military fleet movement." Her voice became colder instantly. "Professional. Commanding. Those are Imperial patrol routes." Ethan leaned forward. "They are searching for you." "No." Veilira slowly zoomed the map farther outward. More red indicators appeared. Hundreds of them. "This is invasion positioning." Ethan stared at the display. "That is not possible. The Dominion Senate would never approve a war deployment this large. The Senate no longer matters." Veilira's expression darkened beneath the pale reactor light. "My father dissolved the High Council 2 months ago." Ethan looked at her sharply. "You are telling me the Emperor staged a military takeover?" She met his eyes at last. "I am telling you the empire I served no longer exists." The station hummed quietly around them. Somewhere down the corridor, a loose vent cover tapped against the wall in steady rhythm. Ethan studied the woman sitting across from him. Not a fugitive anymore. Not just abandoned royalty. A witness. "What happened?" he asked softly. Veilira lowered her gaze to the cup warming her hands. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then finally she spoke. "My mother discovered evidence that several frontier conflicts were manufactured by the Imperial Court." Ethan frowned. "Manufactured? Ships destroyed by our own military. Colonies sabotaged from within. Entire systems forced into dependency through fear." Her voice remained calm, but something heavy moved beneath it now. Old grief pressed flat beneath years of discipline. She intended to expose him publicly. Ethan already knew the answer before he asked. "And your father stopped her?" Veilira nodded once. The reactor lights flickered softly across her silver hair. The official report claimed mechanical failure aboard her royal transport. She paused. "I commanded the investigation myself." Ethan felt the room grow colder despite the heater humming beside them. "You found proof." "I found enough." Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "After that, I became inconvenient." The station fell silent again except for the distant storm. Ethan looked toward the holographic map, filled with red fleet markers spreading slowly across nearby systems like blood beneath ice. Then he looked back at Veilira. She had not touched her drink in several minutes. "You should have run farther than this place," he said quietly. Veilira gave a tired smile that never fully reached her eyes. "I did not come here to survive." Ethan's expression hardened immediately. "Do not say things like that." She looked genuinely surprised by the sharpness in his voice. He leaned forward slightly. "Listen to me carefully, princess. Whatever your father turned this empire into, it does not get to decide whether your life matters." Veilira stared at him in silence. Outside, lightning flashed through the frozen clouds beyond the station windows, washing the room in pale white light for one brief second. And for the first time since arriving at Outpost K-9, the alien princess looked at Ethan Walker not like a human mechanic, but like someone dangerous to lose. The storm finally weakened sometime near dawn, leaving the frozen plains outside Outpost K-9 buried beneath fresh layers of silver-blue snow that reflected the station lights like shattered glass. Ethan stood alone in the observation corridor holding a steaming cup between both hands while pale sunlight slowly pushed through the clouds beyond the mountains. The station creaked around him with tired metallic groans. He had lived on K9 for almost 6 years and never once noticed how quiet the universe could feel before someone else shared it with him. Behind him, soft footsteps approached across the steel floor. Veilira stopped beside the window without speaking. She wore one of Ethan's spare thermal shirts beneath a dark station jacket, several sizes too large for her frame. The royal collar still circled her throat like a shadow that refused to leave. Ethan glanced sideways at her reflection in the glass. "You should still be resting. I have rested enough for one lifetime." Her voice carried less ice now, less distance. They stood there together watching frozen wind sweep across the empty docking fields far below. No ships, no signals, just endless white stretching beneath pale morning light. Veilira finally broke the silence. "When I was young, my mother used to bring me to the northern towers during winter storms." Ethan listened quietly. The palace windows overlooked an ocean of frozen crystal forests. Entire mountains glittered beneath moonlight. A faint sadness touched her expression. "I thought the universe was beautiful back then." Ethan took another sip from his cup. "And now?" Veilira looked toward the distant horizon. "Now I think beautiful things are usually fragile." The words lingered between them for several seconds. Ethan studied her carefully. Beneath the calm voice and controlled posture, exhaustion still lived inside her like an old wound that never healed correctly. "You miss her," he said softly. Veilira did not answer immediately. Then she nodded once. "My mother believed strength without compassion becomes sickness." Her golden eyes lowered slightly. "The Empire considered that philosophy weak." Ethan leaned against the frosted window frame beside her. "Sounds like your Empire has terrible judgment." To his surprise, Veilira laughed quietly. A real laugh this time. Soft and brief, but genuine enough to warm the corridor more than the struggling heaters ever could. Ethan found himself smiling before he realized it. Veilira noticed. Her expression shifted subtly. Curious, almost cautious. "What?" Ethan shrugged. "Nothing. It is just strange hearing you sound alive." The words seemed to hit her. Harder than he intended. The amusement faded slowly from her face. She looked back toward the frozen world outside the glass. "For a long time," she said quietly, "I believed surviving was the same thing as living." Ethan did not respond right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small metal object before holding it toward her. An old station keycard. Worn edges. Scratched paint. Veilira frowned slightly. "What is this?" "Access card." Ethan placed it gently into her hand. Level 2 clearance. Kitchen. Maintenance hall. Generator room. Her eyes widened faintly. "You are giving me unrestricted access to your station?" "It is not much of a station. That is not the point." Ethan met her gaze directly. "You are not a prisoner here, Veilira." Silence filled the corridor again. Heavy this time. The alien princess stared down at the small scratched keycard resting in her palm, like she had been handed something infinitely more valuable than technology. Trust. Simple human trust. Her fingers slowly closed around it. "In the Dominion," she whispered, "trust is earned through leverage." Ethan looked back out at the snow-covered horizon. "Yeah, humans usually start with coffee instead." Veilira shook her head softly, almost smiling again. Then suddenly every light in the corridor dimmed at once. A low warning tone echoed through the station. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. "That is not good." He moved toward the nearest terminal as emergency system alerts flashed red across the screen. External sensors activated automatically. Incoming transmission detected. Unauthorized long-range scan confirmed. Ethan opened the sensor feed. His stomach tightened instantly. 3 enormous ship signatures had just appeared beyond the outer asteroid belt. Dominion military class. Veilira stepped beside him silently. The color drained from her face the moment she saw the fleet markers approaching through the darkness of space. One ship slowly moved ahead of the others. Larger. Black hull. Crimson imperial crest. Ethan looked toward her carefully. "Tell me that is not your father's flagship." Veilira's voice came barely above a whisper. "It is." The command deck of Outpost K9 felt colder after the fleet appeared. Ethan stood motionless in front of the sensor display, while 3 crimson markers drifted silently across the edge of the system map, like predators entering dark water. The largest signal pulsed at the center of the formation. Imperial-class dreadnought, nearly 2 miles long. Enough firepower to erase the entire station without slowing down. Veolyra remained beside him, but something in her posture had changed. The warmth from earlier was gone. Her shoulders straightened. Her expression hardened into the calm mask of someone raised inside palaces and war rooms. Ethan noticed immediately. "Hey," he said quietly. "Do not disappear on me now." Veolyra kept her eyes fixed on the screen. "You do not understand what happens when that ship arrives." "Then explain it." She inhaled slowly before speaking. "My father does not come personally unless he intends to make an example of someone." Ethan folded his arms. "Good thing I was never very good at following examples." A faint tension flickered across her face. Not amusement this time. Fear. Real fear. She stepped closer to the sensor console and enlarged the flagship data. Imperial broadcast arrays. Tactical command relays. Internal security signatures. Ethan frowned at the screen. "Can they track your collar?" "Yes." Her hand instinctively rose toward the black band around her throat. "It carries my biological signature and royal command encryption." Ethan looked at the collar for a long moment. "Then why have you not removed it?" Veolyra's golden eyes lowered slightly. "Only the Emperor can deactivate a royal restraint collar permanently." Ethan leaned against the console. "That sounds incredibly unhealthy." The Dominion was not designed for freedom. Silence settled heavily around the room. Outside the observation windows, snow drifted across the frozen landing fields beneath pale gray skies. The storm had weakened, but the air somehow felt more dangerous now. Ethan watched Veolyra carefully. She looked smaller somehow despite her height. Not physically, emotionally. Like the approaching ship had dragged old chains back around her mind. "You think I should leave?" he said suddenly. Veolyra looked at him immediately, but did not answer. Ethan nodded once. "Yeah, that is what I thought." He walked toward the equipment locker along the far wall and opened it with a metallic clang. Inside rested an old black combat case covered in dust. Veolyra frowned slightly. "What is that?" Ethan keyed the lock open. "Something I promised myself I would never use again." The lid slowly lifted. Inside lay a dark gray military exosuit folded neatly beside an old pulse rifle and a faded Terran Marine Corps insignia, scratched nearly white with age. Veolyra stared at the equipment. "You were military." "Long time ago." Ethan pulled the armored jacket free and checked the power cell. "Back when I still believed governments knew what they were doing." Veolyra stepped closer, studying the worn insignia on his shoulder plate. "You left the service voluntarily?" Ethan gave a quiet laugh. "Not exactly." He slid the jacket on and secured the magnetic seals across his chest. "Turns out military command gets uncomfortable when you refuse certain orders." Veolyra watched him carefully now. Not as a mechanic. Not even as a human. As something else. Someone who understood what it meant to lose faith in authority. Ethan noticed the look in her eyes and shrugged. "Guess we both disappointed powerful fathers in our own way." The words hit her harder than he expected. Veolyra looked away immediately toward the observation glass. Her reflection shimmered faintly beside the stars beyond the clouds. "My father once told me compassion was the weakness that destroys rulers," she said quietly. Ethan holstered the rifle at his side. "Maybe that is why he is terrified of you." Before she could answer, the station alarm suddenly blared through every corridor. "Incoming transmission request. Priority override." Ethan moved quickly back toward the command console and accepted the signal. Static flooded the speakers for a second before the image stabilized. A massive throne room appeared on screen. Black stone, crimson banners, rows of silent armored guards. And at the center of it all sat Emperor Kaler, older than Ethan expected. Sharp features, silver eyes, cold enough to freeze entire worlds. The Emperor looked directly into the camera with absolute calm. "Daughter," he said softly. Veolyra's entire body stiffened beside Ethan. Kaler's gaze shifted slowly toward Ethan next. "Human," the Emperor continued. "You are harboring stolen Imperial property." Ethan's jaw tightened instantly. Veolyra lowered her eyes like somebody trying not to remember pain. But then Ethan stepped slightly forward until he stood between her and the screen. "Funny," he said evenly. She told me the exact same thing about you. For the first time since the transmission began, the Emperor's expression changed. The throne room transmission remained frozen across the command screen for several long seconds after Ethan's answer. Emperor Kaler sat motionless beneath towering crimson banners, while the silence between father and daughter stretched colder than the storm outside the station walls. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Emperor leaned forward in his black throne. "Interesting," he said softly. His silver eyes shifted toward Ethan again with calm amusement that somehow felt more dangerous than anger. Most humans become frightened when they realize they are speaking to power. Ethan folded his arms across the chest plate of his old marine jacket. Most people do not abandon their daughters in shipping containers either. Beside him, Veolyra inhaled sharply. Kaler's expression did not change, but the throne room behind him seemed to darken somehow beneath the low red lighting. "You know nothing about imperial responsibility," the Emperor replied. "No," Ethan said evenly. "But I know what fear looks like." Silence. Heavy silence. Veolyra stared at Ethan like she could not believe he had spoken those words out loud. Kaler's gaze drifted slowly toward his daughter. "You see now, Veolyra," he said quietly. "This is why lesser species are dangerous. They mistake emotional impulse for morality." Veolyra finally lifted her head. "And you mistake cruelty for strength." The Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time. Ethan noticed immediately. Tiny reactions mattered around powerful men. "You still speak like your mother," Kaler murmured. Something painful flickered across Veolyra's face before she forced it back down. "Someone should." The transmission crackled softly. In the background behind the Emperor, officers moved silently between holographic tactical displays. Ethan caught glimpses of star maps, fleet formations, outer colony markers glowing red. Kaler noticed where Ethan was looking and smiled faintly. "Your station lies directly along a new expansion corridor," he explained calmly. "History will not remember it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That sounds like a threat." "No," the Emperor replied. "A logistical observation." Then his attention returned fully to Veolyra. "Come home willingly," he said softly. "Do not force me to demonstrate why empires survive while idealists disappear." The room went completely still. Veolyra stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Home disappeared the day Mother died." Kaler's expression hardened at last. Not rage. Worse. Disappointment. "You were always too sentimental," he said quietly. That weakness infected her as well. Ethan saw Veolyra's hand tremble slightly beside her leg. Just once. Then she straightened her posture again. "Royal. Controlled. You taught me many things, father," she said. "But humanity taught me something you never understood." Kaler tilted his head slightly. "And what is that?" Veolyra glanced toward Ethan standing beside her. "Fear and respect are not the same thing." The Emperor's silver eyes slowly shifted toward Ethan again. Something colder settled into them now. "Final. Human," he said softly. "You have 1 hour to surrender the fugitive princess." Ethan did not move. "And if I say no?" Kaler looked almost bored by the question. "Then your station will become a cautionary tale." The transmission ended instantly. The command room fell silent except for the low hum of failing generators somewhere beneath the floor. Snow drifted across the outer windows in slow white spirals. Ethan exhaled quietly and rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. "Well," he muttered, "that could have gone better." Veolyra stared at the blank screen long after the signal disappeared. Her expression looked distant. Now, hollow in a way Ethan had not seen before. "He means it," she whispered. "I know. He will destroy this station without hesitation." Ethan glanced toward the old reactor monitors blinking unstable yellow nearby. Honestly, the station was probably going to explode eventually anyway. Veolyra looked at him sharply. "Why are you joking?" Ethan met her eyes directly. "Because you look like you are about to blame yourself for this." Silence again. Then Veolyra lowered her gaze slowly. "People die around imperial politics," she said quietly. "They always have." Ethan stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "Listen carefully." His voice softened. "Nobody here is dying for politics." Veolyra looked up at him. The fear in her eyes was no longer for herself. It was for him. Ethan recognized it immediately because he had seen the same expression on soldiers before impossible battles years ago. But beneath the fear, something else existed now too. Trust. Dangerous, growing trust. Outside the station, beyond the frozen clouds, the black Imperial flagship continued moving silently closer through the stars. The Imperial fleet entered low orbit 3 hours later. Outpost K-9 trembled beneath the distant roar of atmospheric engines powerful enough to disturb the frozen clouds themselves. Snow spiraled violently across the landing fields outside, while warning sirens echoed through every corridor of the station in slow repeating waves. Ethan moved through the armory checking power cells with practiced hands as old systems hummed awake around him for the first time in years. Emergency barriers, exterior sensors, docking locks. Most barely worked. The station had never been designed to survive an empire. Veolara stood near the command console, wearing a dark tactical coat Ethan had found buried inside storage. The oversized sleeves covered most of her hands, but nothing could hide the tension in her posture now. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the orbital scanner as more Dominion signatures appeared above the planet. That is not a retrieval force, Ethan muttered while securing another energy pack onto his belt. That is an occupation fleet. Veolara nodded. Slowly. My father does not believe in partial measures. Ethan activated the station defense grid. 2 tiny turret indicators blinked green across the map. He stared at them for a second. Fantastic. We are protected by the military equivalent of bad optimism. Veolara almost smiled before the expression disappeared again. Outside the main viewport, the clouds suddenly split apart. A massive black warship descended through the atmosphere like a moving eclipse. Crimson engine light washed across the snowfields beneath it. Ethan had seen warships before during his marine years, but this vessel felt different. Colder. Purpose-built to intimidate entire civilizations into obedience before firing a single shot. Veolara's face lost what little color remained in it. That ship was my mother's, she whispered. Ethan looked toward her sharply. What? The Emperor took command of it after her death. Her voice remained calm, but grief moved beneath every word now. He renamed it the Sovereign Flame. Ethan studied the descending flagship in silence. Then his eyes narrowed. Wait. He stepped closer to the sensor display and enlarged the hull signature. That transmission relay frequency. Veolara moved beside him. What is wrong? Ethan pointed toward a faint encrypted signal hidden beneath the flagship communication arrays. That is not standard military encryption. It is old. Veolara's golden eyes widened slightly as she read the code. No, she whispered. That cannot be possible. Ethan looked at her. What? Her breathing slowed visibly while she stared at the screen. This encryption belonged to my mother's private network. Silence swallowed the room. Ethan frowned. You said your father destroyed all evidence after her death. He did. Veolara's expression changed rapidly now. Confusion. Realization. Fear. Unless, she moved suddenly toward the central console and began typing commands across the holographic interface with incredible speed. Archived frequencies unfolded across the display in glowing layers of forgotten code. Ethan watched her carefully. Veolara. She ignored him completely for several seconds. Then suddenly the monitor flashed white. An audio file appeared on screen. Unauthorized archive. Security level, royal sealed. Veolara froze. Ethan looked between her and the file. What is it? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. My mother's final transmission. Neither of them moved. The station alarms continued echoing faintly through distant corridors while snow battered the outer walls beyond the windows. Ethan stepped beside her slowly. Can you open it? Veolara stared at the screen like she was afraid breathing too hard might make it disappear. Then finally she pressed play. Static filled the room first. Distorted engine noise. Alarms. Then a woman's voice emerged through the interference. Soft. Elegant. Terrified. If you are hearing this, the voice said, then Kaler has already begun rewriting the truth. Veolara's hand trembled beside the console. The recording continued. The attacks on the frontier colonies were ordered by the Emperor himself. He intends to create permanent war authority and dissolve the Senate entirely. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. The voice crackled again through heavy interference. Veolara, if he discovers what you know, he will come for you next. Tears slowly filled Veolara's golden eyes, though she never looked away from the screen. Then came the final words. Do not let him turn kindness into weakness. The transmission ended. Silence crushed the room afterward. Ethan stared at the blank monitor while the implications settled like ice in his chest. Proof. They had proof. Veolyra slowly closed her eyes. One tear slipped silently down her turquoise cheek. Ethan looked at her carefully, then reached over and shut off the repeating station alarms one by one until only quiet remained between them. Outside, the Emperor's flagship descended lower through the storm clouds toward Outpost K-9. But for the first time since arriving at the station, Veolyra no longer looked afraid. She looked ready. The first shuttle descended from the Imperial flagship just after nightfall. Its engines burned crimson through the snowstorm as it lowered slowly onto the frozen landing field outside Outpost K-9. Ethan stood near the main hangar entrance wearing his old Marine exosuit, while icy wind pushed against him hard enough to shake loose snow from the station roof above. Beside him, Veolyra watched the shuttle through the half-open blast doors. Her silver hair moved softly in the freezing air, and the black royal collar around her throat pulsed faintly beneath the pale blue station lights. But something about her had changed completely now. The fear was gone. The Empire had abandoned a broken daughter here weeks ago. What stood beside Ethan now looked more like a queen returning from exile. The shuttle touched down with a heavy metallic hiss. A ramp lowered slowly into the snow. Emperor Kaler emerged alone. No guards. No weapons visible. Just a long black ceremonial coat moving through the wind like dark smoke. Ethan instinctively shifted slightly forward anyway. Old military habits never fully disappeared. The Emperor stopped several yards away from them. Snow drifted between father and daughter in silent white sheets. "You recovered the archive," Kaler said calmly. Veolyra met his gaze without flinching. "Mother recorded the truth because she knew what you would become." The Emperor's expression remained unreadable. Truth is whatever preserves civilization. Ethan folded his arms. Funny. Dictators always say things like that. Kaler barely acknowledged him. His attention stayed locked on Veolyra. "You still believe compassion can govern an empire?" "No," Veolyra replied softly. "I believe fear destroys one." Silence spread across the frozen landing field. The wind screamed around the station towers while the massive flagship hovered above the clouds like a dark second moon. Then suddenly, every communication array inside the Imperial fleet activated at once. Ethan looked up sharply as emergency frequencies burst across the station monitors behind him. Veolyra had already transmitted the archive. Every ship, every colony, every Senate relay in Dominion space now carried her mother's final recording. Kaler realized it instantly. For the first time since arriving, genuine emotion crossed the Emperor's face. Not rage. Shock. Somewhere high above them, warning sirens began echoing faintly through the fleet itself. Multiple encrypted channels exploded alive across orbital traffic. Ethan glanced toward the station sensors. Fleet signatures were breaking formation. Several destroyers had suddenly changed alignment. "Looks like your people heard the message," Ethan muttered. Kaler stared at his daughter in silence for several long seconds. Then finally he spoke. "You would burn down your own empire for this?" Veolyra's golden eyes reflected the crimson engine glow from the shuttle beneath the falling snow. "No," she answered quietly. "You already did that." The Emperor looked older somehow after those words. Smaller. Like power itself had finally become too heavy to carry. Above them, the massive flagship slowly began pulling away from orbit. One by one, additional warships followed. Not retreating exactly. Fracturing. The Empire was splitting apart in real time. Ethan watched the fleet movements across his wrist display with disbelief. "Your throne is collapsing," he said carefully. Kaler gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "Then perhaps it was weaker than I believed." Another long silence followed. Then the Emperor looked at Veolyra one final time. "Your mother once told me kindness was contagious," he murmured. "I did not understand what she meant until now." Veolyra said nothing. She simply reached up slowly and unclasped the black restraint collar from around her throat. This time the lock released without resistance. The Imperial command authority behind it no longer existed. She stared at the collar for a moment before placing it quietly into Ethan's gloved hand. Snow gathered across the dark metal almost immediately. "The first person who treated me like I mattered," she whispered softly, "was human." Ethan looked down at the broken collar resting in his palm, then back at her. Somewhere above the clouds, The last Imperial warship disappeared into the darkness between stars. Months later, people across the outer systems would speak about the night the Dominion throne became empty. Some said an empire collapsed because of war. Others said it collapsed because one forgotten princess chose compassion over fear. But on the frozen edge of the galaxy, inside a broken mining station that still smelled faintly like burnt coffee and machine oil, Ethan Walker only remembered one thing. The way Valyra stood quietly beside the window afterward, watching snow fall across the stars for the first time in years, like somebody finally learning what freedom looked like.